Hello, I'm Amy Zawi with the Jerusalem Connection Report for Friday, June 12th. Updates on various accomplishments. Last week I mentioned that there is a false narrative regarding the idea of a split Jerusalem and disputed territories, and East Jerusalem being considered traditionally Arab in identity and without a presence of Judaism in that area. And I wanted to go over the history for just a moment so that you all had the facts at hand. Jerusalem was indeed one city, not separated, much like Berlin has been a city in Germany for centuries, unseparated. That was separated by force in 1948 when the War for Independence had the Jordanians come in and occupy what is known as East Jerusalem. And in that time, they expelled the Jews who did reside there and work there, as well as they destroyed the synagogues and desecrated the cemeteries in an attempt to erase the Jewish presence or the Jewish identity of the eastern part of Jerusalem. And that was maintained for approximately 19 years when, in the Six-Day War, a defensive war fought by Israel, Israel regained that portion of the city, and it was considered reunified. And that's what we are celebrating on June 7th, 2017, is 50 years of the reunification of Jerusalem. However, when you read the New York Times or the LA Times, or you hear people discuss on mainstream media this idea of East Jerusalem, they will constantly use the term traditionally Arab East Jerusalem. And that's the point I want to address. In fact, prior to 1948, Jerusalem was always one city and always maintained a Jewish presence. In various levels of that population, Jews have always lived, worked, worshipped, and died in East Jerusalem. And therefore, the only traditionally Arab East Jerusalem period of history is the 19 years between 1948 and 1967. That's 19 years out of 3,000 years that there was no Jewish presence in the city, and that was by force under Jordanian occupation. So I want everybody to have a little history on that and be clear that the efforts to erase Judaism and the Jewish presence from certain areas of what is Israel and the Holy Land goes along with this narrative, and we must be aware of it, and we must have our facts in order to combat that. In addition, back to the BDS, boycott, divest, sanction movement that occurs on campuses all over the Western world, and in particular in the United States, groups are trying to encourage academic institutions to boycott intellectual and academic partnerships with Israeli universities, and even as far as professors who are Jewish or student groups that are Jewish. Moreover, Dartmouth had an appointee to the Dean of Faculty who was a known BDS supporter, and the group called Dartmouth Students for Israel and one of the Jewish professors openly decried this appointment, and the result of their letter that correctly articulated the incongruency of this appointment with educational values, this appointee has stepped down. But the BDS movement alleges three particular objectives, and that is to give Palestinians equal rights in Israel, to remove Israel from the West Bank, so-called occupied areas, as well as allow for a right of return for Palestinians or Arabs. And the problem that this Dartmouth is Dartmouth Students for Israel and this professor articulated so well in their letter was that these three objectives are based on a false sense of premises. First of all, is regarding the West Bank. Israel is not an occupying agent per se, and there has always been a Jewish presence and identity in those areas. And Israel did win the West Bank back in a defensive war, which according to international law is a legitimate way to acquire land. Second, the premise that our BDS movement wants equal rights for Palestinians in Israel assumes that there are not equal rights for Palestinians in Israel, which is just simply not the case. The rule of law and the judicial branch of the Israeli government is a very egalitarian, and it is based on a set of rules that are equally applied to all peoples, whether they are Christian or Druze or Jews or Arabs or Muslims living in the land. So that's a non-starter right there. And the third issue is this point of the right of return. And this is a little ambiguous because the narrative set forth in Arabic to the Arab populations and neighbors is the notion that the right of return is for any Arab or Palestinian who simply claims that they are from that particular area, and as such gets to move not only him or herself there with no documentation or any proof that there's a tie or a deed or an origin to that piece of property or that community, and that they can bring their entire extended family. So the right of return and the outspoken notion of a two-state solution is being marketed to the Arab world as two Arab states, and that is with moving significant amounts of Palestinians or Arabs into areas with no documentation that there's a point of origin there would actually flush out the Jewish identity through a population movement. So this right of return is ambiguous and does not have any reasonable or measures for which you can say to someone that they had this land, they were removed from it, and now they're coming back to it. There is no burden to prove that as far as this right of return for the Arabs. So these are the three BDS objectives that were then articulated by the Dartmouth Students for Israel and its sponsoring professor that I thought was a very good way to articulate why the BDS movement is erroneous in its premises and anti-Semitic at its core. The idea that the Jewish identity and the Jewish presence in the Middle East should be erased or somehow snuffed out. So colleges and administrators certainly must allow for an academic and intellectual debate regarding all issues on campuses. Agree or disagree with them, but they need to be reasoned, and there should be a burden of some sense of honesty, intellectual honesty, academic honesty, in terms of looking at points of history, rules of law, and equally applying justice and fairness to all sides of an issue as these students are engaged in these debates, who are hearing these debates, and are forming their own opinions about what policies should be and how they support them. It is with this that I have one final point, and that is that all 50 U.S. governors have on May 18th signed an open letter decrying or offering their thoughts against the BDS movement within their states and on their campuses. And this particular letter doesn't have any action or teeth to it. It's just more of a declaration or a philosophical standpoint. But all 50 U.S. governors are recognizing that BDS activities within their states is not condoned. And these are both Democrat and Republican governors. So it is a wonderful a lockstep solidarity movement to say we recognize BDS as anti-Semitic and wrong and against our values. So that's a good thing. The other thing this letter stated was that there is a support for a two-state solution. Now, of course, that does not make all supporters of Israel happy. And there are reasoned people on both sides of the single-state and two-state argument, and that can be debated separately. But everybody is recognizing that Israel, in and of itself, has the right to exist and has the right to fair assessment and logical debate in the corridors of academia as well as the corridors of political bodies. And that is a good thing, and that's what I wanted to end on today. So, Shavua Tov, have a great week, and Shabbat Shalom.